as we see with this story, there are still elements within these institutions, including the military, but others, that are eager to try and sabotage Trump at every turn.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics for Friday, March 7th. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So news out of the White House today on Ukraine, guys. Trump threatened more economic sanctions on Russia, saying in a social media post to Russia and Ukraine, this is the quote, "Get to the table right now before it is too late." He also talked to reporters in the Oval Office and said he believes Vladimir Putin wants peace, saying, "I'm finding it more difficult to deal with Ukraine. They don't have the cards." So, Tom, what do you make of the president's latest diplomatic moves?
Well, I mean, this is what everybody wanted, right? Time to get tough on Russia. Everyone's,
Yeah.
oh, he's giving away the store. He's giving away the store.
Well, we'll see how tough he gets, but yeah.
Well, we'll see. But obviously, it's a change of tone a little bit. And he said, look, Russia's absolutely pounding Ukraine. And so he's threatening if they don't stop doing that and get to the table, that he might impose a bunch of sanctions. So we'll see. But I mean, look, it's a tricky process, and both sides have their clearly Ukraine has been all over the map in terms of they want a deal, they kind of don't want a deal, and I suspect the same is going on with Russia. We ran a clip of Pete Hegseth yesterday. He was in this impromptu cabinet meeting where he said, and I completely agree with him. He said, listen, there are media narratives out there, but like you have to ignore all that, because what's going on is Trump's the only one that can get this done. He's the only one who has the sort of ability to get both of these folks to the table, and he's trying to do that, and we'll see whether he's successful or not.
Carl, what incentives does Putin have to come to the table? It doesn't. We've already got sanctions on him. Is this going to make a difference?
I guess they could get, worse. You could have more sanctions. But look, Andy, the thing is, Donald Trump thinks both sides want a deal. And if you could just get him in the room, he sees himself as the consummate deal maker. But the Ukrainians don't want a deal. They want a country. And they want a country that's safe and protected. They want their own country. And Vladimir Putin doesn't want a deal. He wants to recreate the Soviet Empire. So, and in that dream, Ukraine is well within the borders of the Soviet Empire. This is a very difficult negotiation because it's hard to see what the middle ground is here. Donald Trump has this almost childlike faith in his ability to, forge an agreement, and God bless him if he does. But we'll see how Putin responds to this.
Yeah. I should tell people, if you're watching this on YouTube, I am at my mother's house in Stamford, Connecticut. She's a painter. And so you are seeing some of her paintings behind me. I just realized that people might be wondering what that is, but that's Jean Walworth, the world famous artist, and 96 years old and still painting. So that's what you're seeing behind you. So if you're listening, you should go on YouTube so you can see my mom's painting. But Zelensky will be said on Thursday he would travel to Saudi Arabia next Monday for a meeting with the Crown Prince there, and then talks later this week between the U.S. and Ukraine. But Tom, why Saudi Arabia? Why not London or someplace closer? I mean, is this trying to make it seem like the U.S. is more neutral between these two and not sort of on Ukraine's side? I can't figure out the sort of diplomacy here.
Oh, I don't know exactly why they chose Saudi Arabia as the venue.
I think I know.
Oh, okay.
Please tell us. Yeah.
I think it speaks so Vladimir Putin will feel comfortable because he's on the soil of another head of state who kills his opponents.
Carl.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
But to Carl's point, and Trump keeps saying this. I mean, Zelensky doesn't want a deal. He wants a country. And the problem is, can you imagine? So here's the situation. It's like Carl and I are, we're the coaches of two football teams, and his team's losing 42-0, and he
Wait,
wants
wait. So
We
he's
got
the
him right where we
Ukraine?
want him. Yeah.
exactly.
And he's Ukraine?
He's the
42 to
Ukrainians.
nothing?
And
Oh, okay, well,
he's
Jesus.
losing 42 to nothing. And he wants to act like it's a tied ball game. And that's the problem. Zelensky, he doesn't have the cards. There are going to have to be, you know, compromises and sacrifices made to get a deal done. And he's not willing to make any of them, despite the fact that he is in a pretty rough spot. And
That's Tom. That he has said that he's willing to abide by a ceasefire if they stop firing missiles at his people. He will do a ceasefire in the a nautical ceasefire, I guess, a maritime ceasefire you would call it, and the fighting stops at the border. That seems to be a pretty reasonable position for Zelensky to take. Also, when you say he has no cards, you know, the Russians have been doing this for 3 years. They've lost 800,000 men. They've taken 20% of the country, but that's about it. They've lost Russian territory to Ukraine. I'm not so sure that it's 42 nothing. I think it's a much closer game than you're saying.
Well, even if it was,
Wait, I want to hear what Tom has to say about.
well,
Is that really you want to stick by that
does it-
score? You want to?
okay, but go ahead, Tom, and then I'll
he's down
pile
two
on.
touchdowns. He's down two touchdowns, not
Okay.
6.
All right.
But here's a bad analogy anyway. Zelensky didn't agree to play a football game. His country was invaded.
Yeah.
It was invaded. It was like South Korea was invaded by North Korea. The Russians thought they could take this country in 3 days. It's been 3 years. I don't say you can defeat the Red Army. I've said this before on the show. Napoleon couldn't do it. Hitler couldn't do it. Russia's
The Mujahideen did it.
Russia's a tough country. But this idea that the United States should treat these two partners as though it's an equal. There's no moral equivalency, Tom. You say there's no equivalency in firepower between the two countries. I get that point, but Ukraine was invaded. They had assurances from Russia and the world community that they were a viable country with viable borders. And so the United States, for Donald Trump to position the United States like that we're a neutral power broker and that each side has an equal argument, I think that's one of the things that sticks in the craw of many Americans.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the economy for a second. We do get some economic numbers today. The U.S. added 151,000 jobs in February. Unemployment rate rose to 4.1%. This is the first jobs report covering Trump's second term. Pretty hard to ascribe any of these numbers to his administration so far. But Karl, do the numbers tell us anything about what to expect from a Trump economy at this point?
Well, it's interesting because we have population growth. We have to add something like 125,000 jobs just to stay even. So 151,000 sounds like a lot of jobs. It's good, but it's not great. And meanwhile, Donald Trump is shedding government jobs at a rather astonishing rate.
Yeah, well, those haven't shown up in these numbers.
Yeah, that's
yet,
what I'm saying. We'll see. I'm curious next month if that's going to move the needle at all.
Yeah, well, Trump did say today that they added 10,000 manufacturing jobs. And it's like raises a question whether, and Karl sort of alluded to it, whether all jobs are created equal. I mean, if you shed some federal government jobs, but you add manufacturing jobs, isn't that a net plus for the economy, seeing as those federal jobs are all being paid for by tax dollars?
Sure. And I think that's, the Biden administration touted all the jobs that they had created over time. And some of those jobs were part-time jobs and
a lot of them were government jobs, Tom.
Government jobs. Yeah. So yes, I mean, if you dig in the numbers, not all jobs are created equal. And you do want to see manufacturing jobs. You want to see manufacturing growing. But look, this is, and we've talked about this repeatedly, that, Trump has a certain amount of leeway on the economy, on inflation, but he's only going to get so much time. And if the Democrats if they had 2 brain cells to rub together, they'd stop doing these stupid videos, these cringy nonsense things that they're doing, and start doing some videos and promoting on social media, things about the economy. And because, and try and get voters focused on the economy and get to the point, try and encourage them to get to the point where they say, look, this is Trump's economy, right? When they said it 5 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, or even 2 weeks ago, oh, Trump's to blame for this, Trump's to blame for that. It rings hollow. But 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, it's not going to ring nearly as hollow. And so they should get focused on it instead of doing the stupid shit that they've been doing.
Tom, our friend Maria Cardona, who's been on this show, activist Democrat and works in the Democratic Party, she was on CNN this week saying exactly what you're saying, over and over again, saying, she even exaggerated. She said Trump was elected to do one thing, fix the economy, bring down inflation, get costs down. Well, you and I know all three of us know there was more going on in that campaign than that. He talked about the border and crime and other things. He talked about Ukraine. But the smart Democrats are starting to say exactly what you're saying, Tom. This is now Trump's economy, and this, you would think it would be too soon, Andy, 6-7 weeks in, but the speed with which President Trump has done these other things, with which Elon Musk has acted, everything's accelerated. And so, I think it's going to be sooner rather than later when this is Donald Trump's economy.
Yeah, Carl, I think that's a really good point. I think the rapidity with everything happening in the Trump administration will contribute to rapidity in the way people react to his policies. So we'll keep an eye on it.
You only get one job report, a month. So
right.
This was kind of a meh reading, whatever.
Yeah.
4 weeks from now,
right.
If he gets another bad one, then that'll obviously heighten things. But you got to wait 4 weeks to get that next reading.
Yeah, the other thing is, like, every month they release these numbers and they correct the numbers from the previous month or two. So I always take these numbers with a grain of salt, because
especially when Biden was president.
They
were
wild,
wildly off,
right? Yeah. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Karl Cannon. We're going to take a break and be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Karl Cannon and Tom Bevan. And Karl, I want to talk about the Donald Trump Revenge Tour, as it's been called. He signed an executive order yesterday, Thursday, suspending the security clearances of employees at Perkins Coie. That's the big-time Democratic law firm. He cited the law firm's diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. But, this probably had more to do with the fact that this is the firm that used Democratic Party money to hire the opposition research firm that commissioned the Russian dossier about Trump and his 2016 campaign. Karl, one example of Trump settling scores with his political opponents. What do you make of it, and do you expect more?
Well, the executive order mentions what you said, Andy, as well. It also mentions that this was the firm that went after him, and the fake Russian hoax. I forget the exact language in the order, but he singles out Mark Elias, was the chief partner in that firm and kind of the puppet master of all this. Elias, look, love him or hate him, he's a very effective guy and a very all elbows partisan, very tough, been tough on the Republicans, and he's the one who orchestrated this. But he's not with that law firm anymore.
Right.
So now, should that be a factor? I think it might be. But on the bigger thing, you're going to just revoke their security clearance. You're not going to let them in government buildings anymore. I very doubtful. It's an executive order. Is it illegal? Hell, I don't know. Executive orders have kind of a special. There's a lower constitutional bar than an act of Congress. Courts are loath to throw out an executive order, but if ever there was one tailor-made to be tossed out by the courts, it's this one. He did other things too. The U.S. Attorney Ed Martin sent this letter to the Georgetown University president yesterday, saying if you have DEI in your law school, whistleblowers told us there's still DEI at Georgetown. Well, there's still DEI at every university in America and every community college too. Probably down to every kindergarten, but he singled out Georgetown University, which they consider the Trump people a hotbed of anti-Trump activism. The dean of law school wrote back a letter, screw you, strong letter to follow kind of thing. But
what they said was they weren't going to hire any graduates from the Georgetown Law School, correct?
That's right. Well, I even consider them for the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
And I don't think that. I wonder if that's legal too. But the other, but Trump had two daughters who went to that college, including one who recently graduated from the law school. So I guess Tiffany Trump can't apply to be an assistant U.S. attorney either. If that's really,
She might get an exemption, Carl. There might be
Yeah,
a
right.
carve-out.
There might be a carve out. It's carve out for everything else.
It's like the tariffs. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But Tom, the idea was at one point that the revenge would be so much winning, so much winning. But it looks like we're getting some real Trump-like revenge. What do you make of it? And do you think it will continue apace?
Oh, it's going to continue for sure, in various forms, and this was just one example. Look, Perkins Coie has been, it's a Democratic law firm. I mean, they've represented Democrats and the Hillary Clinton campaign, and both times. And Mark Elias was his perch for a long time, and he's as Carl said, sort of a rabid partisan. So, look, are there people at that law firm? This goes to the way they're doing business, right? It's like, does this order end up cutting out some people who are, working in different agencies and might be doing some important work? Perhaps.
Oh yeah, presumably having a security clearance is
presumably
in
an
Washington,
important part of doing your work in
But at the same
Washington if you're a
time,
law
too, I
firm.
mean,
it's hard to practice law in Washington without one. I mean,
yeah, but at the same time, I mean, the flip side is, and this is probably what Trump supporters did, like, did Perkins Coie, did they suffer any consequences? Were there any ramifications for that firm for the way that they conducted themselves and the members of that firm conducted themselves over the last 8-10 years? I don't know that there were. And should there have been? Yeah, maybe there should have been. So
you dream up one lousy hoax. And
right?
Well,
you orchestrate one, the dirtiest political trick of all time. And I mean, like, who cares?
Well, I guess Tom, the question is this the proper venue to discipline them?
Probably not. But again, I'll say, have they been
Okay,
held responsible or accountable in any other venue? No. And that's what Trump, I think, that's part of the revenge tour.
Okay, well, it's definitely going to be challenged in court, and we'll see what happens. The other interesting story, Carl, was this Enola Gay story. This is part of the anti-DEI efforts at the Pentagon. Apparently, they deleted photographs of Enola Gay and other people with the last name Gay because they wanted to get rid of any photos that had anything to do with anything gay.
Well,
Do I got that right?
Yeah, the AP wrote a story sort of suggesting that Enola Gay could maybe come under this. It was a little vague. AP was careful, Associated Press. Then the Daily Beast writes a story. Oh yeah, they got rid of Enola Gay. I think two things. First of all, this is not even going to be true.
Okay.
As we really look into it, look, in the old days in journalism, we would have said this story is too good to check. But
it is a pretty funny story.
Yeah, that's right. It reads like something out of The Onion. And the White House had a slightly different reaction because some of the photographs that were taken down were of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Mm-hmm.
And the White House got angry and ordered the Air Force took them down, supposedly complying with this order. And the White House response was, was a malicious undermining of the order. In other words, they were sabotaging the order and ordered that they be put back up. So this story is a little more complicated than it seems, but I think the administration, it's a warning to the administration. They should be careful. This is the administration, this is the president who objected to tearing down statues. And so to go to the other extreme, Donald Trump said in his speech Tuesday night, we want, the military has been, too woke, and we want lethal war fighters, and we're going to get all that extraneous stuff out of there. But you have to be careful how you go about it. It's not a rumor that the Maryland National Guard was not allowed to do a flyover on Frederick Douglass' birthday. And I said on this show, Frederick Douglass was a hero in the United States Army. And so if you have young people with Elon Musk thing or young people, Pete Hegseth's come in, they may not even know who the Tuskegee Airmen were. And so I think this is a warning that the Trump people ought to heed, which is this stuff can be used against you, even in a malicious or cynical way. But B, you have to be careful you're not erasing history yourself, because this is one of the things Trump ran against.
Yeah, Carl, I have to thank you because once again, I took this Friday afternoon story and you turned it into something of seriousness and note. I appreciate your ability to do that. But Tom, what do you make of this aspect of it? I mean,
Well,
did
Carl's
you
right.
think
I
the
mean,
anti-DEI is going too far?
I don't. I think that the way that, look, again, the pendulum's sort of swinging back, and I take Carl's point. I think the Trump administration needs to be careful, because as we see with this story, there are still elements within these institutions, including the military, but others, that are eager to try and sabotage Trump at every turn. So they take, this effort to, roll back some of the language that's been injected in all of the, regulations and of these institutions, and they turn it into something and then leak it to the press as if, Trump has done something horrible and he is erasing history. So I think he has to be careful. I think the overall effort is appropriate. But there, as we see, there are going to be booby traps along the way, and they have to be aware of those and watch out for those, because otherwise they'll get themselves into situations where, they can be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think the real lesson is don't rely on keyword searches when you go to eliminate photos or anything else. Hey, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Karl Cannon. We're going to take a break, but don't go away because we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics right after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Karl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with Peter Berkowitz, regular columnist for Real Clear Politics, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, former State Department official, and an expert on the Middle East. So, Peter, you're perfectly positioned because I want to talk about these developments. The letter President Trump sent to Iran, these negotiations with Hamas, and some of the threats he's made on social media. So let's start with the United States negotiating with Hamas. That's new. Some people are shocked by it. Some other people think it makes sense. What's your view?
So you're right that it's new, but what's new here is the direct negotiations. In other words, the United States has been a part of these multi-party negotiations that have been conducted with Hamas now since at least November 2023. These negotiations involve also Qatar, and they also involve Egypt. But Qatar and Egypt and the United States have worked as mediators between Israel and Hamas. But direct negotiations between the United States and Hamas, which, as Steve Witkoff, Special White House Envoy for the Middle East, has acknowledged, concern in the first place U.S. Hostage. This is something new, and we have good reason to believe that information about these negotiations was actually leaked by the Israelis because they were upset with the one-sided character of it, that is, splitting the negotiations over Israeli hostages from negotiations over American hostages. Witkoff emphasizes that it's all part and parcel of the same negotiations, but naturally, the United States puts American hostages first. This is understandable, but still, it's troublesome to see a kind of opening between the United States and Israel in these negotiations.
Well, if President Trump negotiated the release of one American hostage and left Israeli hostages there, this would be a dual citizen hostage. I mean, that would not make the United States look very good. I can't think that's really their goal here.
Oh, I don't think it's their goal as well. And as you've indicated in the questions that you've teased us with, President Trump has on already a number of occasions said that there will be hell to pay if all the remaining hostages are not released. And we must make clear, when we say all the remaining hostages released, we mean there are now about 59 held. We mean about half who are alive, and the other half of whom are dead, are corpses to be released. Those are treated under the heading of hostages. But yes, I think you're right. All of President Trump's public statements have indicated that there will be hell to pay for Hamas if all of the hostages, Israelis and Americans, are not released.
Now he took to Truth Social his version of Twitter, I guess we have to call it X now, and threatened Hamas like in sort of Trumpian language, all caps and schoolyard language, and I at first it struck me almost as humorous, but then you think of the stakes involved. It's not funny. It's a very serious thing, and these are bloodthirsty people. Is this? But what are they supposed to take from that? Let me rephrase that. Can this possibly work? This tactic?
Possibly. Again, it depends on what lies behind the threat. There are strong indications already that President Trump means to make available to the Israelis all the weapons that they need to conduct their business. We know that the Biden administration withheld substantial amounts of weapons and also kinds of weapons to limit the Israelis' ability to seek out and destroy Hamas. So I suspect that what Trump has in mind is that he's going to unleash the Israelis to complete what is their announced war mission: eradicate Hamas as a fighting force and as a governing force.
Peter, I've done no reporting on this, and I have no inside knowledge, but I do know this: when those children, the Bibas kids, when we found out they had been killed and strangled, murdered by somebody by hand, this barbaric act. I was thinking, we have a president now. He has Jewish grandchildren. We've never had a president who has Jewish grandchildren. I wonder if he took this personally or reacted in a personal way to it that has not been reported. That would make perfect sense.
First of all, Karl, you've written beautifully and movingly about the deaths of the members of the Bibas family and the reaction in Israel, and I think you're onto something. We have a photograph from a day or two ago of Trump surrounded by 8 released hostages. There is good reason to believe that for all of his bluster and bravado, that the plight of the hostages, Israeli and American, in Gaza Strip, held by the jihadist monsters, has deeply moved him, and if the hostages are not returned, he will accede to Israel's request, which is, please give us the weapons we need to finish the business of destroying the people who wish to destroy us.
You're listening to Peter Berkowitz, a columnist for RealClearPolitics, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, former State Department official. Peter, does this ever entail? I'm contemplating the use of American special forces, American troops against Hamas. President Trump has spoken about Gaza in ways that has surprised everybody, his own staff, the world. We're going to get rid of the Gazans and we're going to build. It's going to be the Riviera. Sort of pie in the sky stuff. But if you're talking about destroying Hamas and giving Israel cover, giving them weapons and giving them public support is one thing. But if you send American troops in there, as Ronald Reagan learned, it's a whole nother ballgame.
Yes, but the Israelis now are very experienced in engaging in urban warfare. It would be symbolically very significant if Trump sent American special forces to Gaza. But we should distinguish. Israel has, with American weapons, Israel has the fighting capabilities it needs in Gaza. The Iran case is entirely different. In regard to Iran, the United States has capabilities for striking Iran's nuclear facilities that Israel certainly does lack. So,
all right, wait a minute. I'll get to that in a minute. I want to ask you a Iran question, but I want to finish this thing about the hostages.
Very good.
Because you reminded me of something. Ronald Reagan nearly was impeached over the Iran-Contra scandal, and the roots of that scandal are, I won't, if you're a young listener and you're unfamiliar with it, Google it. But the roots of it were Reagan's. This is clear in Reagan's diaries. He felt these hostages, they were American hostages, in most of them in Beirut. It ate at him. It really galled him and it upset him and it caused him sleep. And I think we forget sometimes the human dimension with Reagan, with Bill Clinton. I talked to him about this when he was president. these hostages, presidents take it personally. They want to get those people back.
I think that's right, Colin, and I would add this. It seems to me one of the great failings of the Biden administration was not every day or almost every day to demand the release of all hostages and to demand Hamas's unconditional surrender. It was a big mistake for the United States to treat the war between Israel and Hamas as a war between two sides who merely had differences of opinion. The war between Israel and Hamas is a war between one side, Hamas, which wishes to destroy a sovereign nation state. There's no equivalency. There's no equivalent justice on both sides. We ought to have been demanding the return of hostages every day. And Trump, maybe not every single day, but has consistently, since he returned to the White House, been making the issue of the hostages, American and Israeli, a central issue of American foreign policy.
All right, now I cut you off. I apologize for that. Let's go on to Iran, because the president now has sent this letter to the supreme leader of Iran. We don't know, as we're doing this show, we'll find out more on Saturday what exactly was in the letter, but it concerns Iran, apparently concerns Iran's nuclear capability. And I think the world has, excuse me, the world has seen that that's because Iran is the proxy of, Hezbollah and Hamas are proxies of Iran, that these people can't be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That's kind of a consensus in the West. But how do you stop it? What do you do?
Yes. So, the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo took the lead here, imposed what we called a maximum pressure campaign on Iran. Very burdensome sanctions with a goal. The goal was to bring Iran back to the negotiating table on terms favorable to the United States. This is in contrast to the approach we believe that the Obama administration took. Now, there's more to that. It seems to me the Trump administration is perfectly justified in giving the Ayatollahs an opportunity to negotiate the dismantling of their nuclear program. But I want to add this. It will not be adequate unless these negotiations also include an end to sponsoring terrorism around the region and an end to their ballistic missile program, which threatens not only Middle Eastern countries but friends and partners in Europe as well. So I'm all in favor of negotiating with the Iranians from a position of strength, but we must add this. Position of strength means, pardon the cliche, the credible use of force if the negotiations break down. Apparently, the letter suggests that the Trump administration is prepared to use force if the negotiations break down.
We're going to leave it there. You've been listening to Peter Berkowitz, a columnist for RealClearPolitics, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, former State Department official, and a good friend of mine. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for RealClearPolitics, and we'll be back after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Karl Zinsmeister. Karl is a longtime journalist, author of a number of books, including his newest, which is called Backbone: Why American Populism Should Be Welcome and Not Feared. And it's a collection of essays, maverick essays, in praise of Middle America. Karl, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Likewise. Great to be here.
So how did this project come about? What was the impetus for it?
Well, as you know, Tom, I spent a lot of time as a magazine editor that gave me a license to wander across the country and just go to parts of our amazingly sprawling nation that don't get reported on much. And obviously, I talked to experts and authorities in each of those spots, but I also talked to just a lot of regular people. And I was tremendously struck. It became a theme, really, of my whole career of reporting. I was struck by how much wisdom and common sense and decency you find all across our country in towns. And that isn't just kind of a sentimental feeling. It's backed by all kinds of data. And that became kind of my purpose, was to kind of document and display this reservoir of talent across America. And then when, in the last couple of years, people started flapping their wings about populism, how terrifying it might be to have ordinary rubes actually making the big decisions, I thought, well, I actually have some interesting evidence on that. And so I pulled out this material from all across the country and said, calm down, folks. We can trust these people to make the decisions that really matter.
Yeah, and we published an excerpt from, I think it's the introduction on RealClearPolitics back in the third week of January, and I urge all of our listeners to go and get the book, because it does. And I want to read a little bit from it. And it says, here's what you wrote. Quote, "Run-of-the-mill Americans can be trusted, indeed must be trusted, to make our society's most crucial decisions. The uprising that returned Donald Trump to the White House is not some rash tantrum. It has been building for 3 decades and fits seamlessly in a long historical string of protests that break out whenever normal citizens feel they're being domineered over." And you said, "The 2025 backlash is a predictable response to this power grab. Everyday workers and families and neighbors have answered with an emphatic, 'Oh, no, you don't.'" And that, I mean, talk a little bit about when you talk to folks in middle America, for lack of a better word, or all across the country, quite frankly, why are they so disconnected from, or do they feel so disconnected from their representatives in Washington, D.C.?
They do. They feel like they've been betrayed and kind of patted on the head a lot. And it isn't just a negative thing, Tom. I also want to make the point that there's this positive feeling that we can run things. We can decide what really matters to our own families and our own communities. And let me just document a little of this. We have this amazingly multipolar nation. I don't know if our listeners realize only about a quarter of the Forbes 400, richest people in America now live in the DC to New England corridor that used to be the big wealth belt. In sector after sector, we've just become a super multipolar world. Take finance. Everyone thinks, well, New York is the center of finance. And of course it is at one level. But, most of our big banks today are actually based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And our biggest, personal investment firm is in a little old Malvern, Pennsylvania. That's Vanguard. And, Warren Buffett lives in Omaha. So this is true in sector after sector. There's competence and experience and judgment in all kinds of places that really don't want somebody from DC coming in and patting them on the head and saying, this is how it has to be.
And why do, thinking about populism sort of historically, and I would say, look, we had this, I would say, arguably for the second half of the 20th century, populism was sort of a left-wing dominated ideology, if you will, and then we did have this uprising with Donald Trump, and Bernie Sanders was sort of the mirror image of populism for progressives, and they were both extremely popular. Trump went on to win, obviously, in 2016, and Bernie, as has been well documented, sort of got, the establishment sort of put their thumb on the scale against him in 2016, and quite frankly, again in 2020. But so talk a little bit about the history of populism and how we've gotten to this point where it is now making a resurgence.
Well, part of it, I think, Tom, is there are new tools today that didn't used to exist that allow smart people to really intrude in our lives in ways that wasn't possible. I mean, we used to all read, I don't know how many, 10,000 different local newspapers. Now, most of us read, one of 50 different things. So we've become much more centralized in that sense. Technology in general has made it possible for smart, credentialed people to say, yeah, you can say this online, and no, you can't say that. So there's a degree of regulation and oversight and control that just simply didn't used to exist. There's also a different political ethic. This really started around the Obama years, where there was this strong sense that people with graduate degrees and scientists and experts and authorities, we should all defer to them. They are the real people that should make these hard calls. And obviously, I'm not an ignoramus who thinks that that education doesn't matter or that expertise doesn't matter. Of course, it does. But those folks should have a voice at the table, but they should not make the final call. Wisdom is much more loosely distributed than that. And there's a moral piece. I mean, during COVID, it's a perfect example. A lot of this blew up in COVID, Tom. I think COVID really was the overdose for many of us, where we said, the heck with this idea of leaving it to the experts, because the experts made terrible calls. They had so many things that they got wrong. And even when they were right, the public health people said, you got to do it for public health reasons, not realizing there's an economic aspect to this. There's an emotional aspect to not being able to talk to my mom in her home anymore. There's a piece of it not being able to get married that matters to me. So none of those kind of holistic considerations were made when we handed the car keys over to the expert class.
Yeah. We're speaking with Karl Zinsmeister. He's the author of a new book called Backbone, Maverick Essays in Praise of Middle America. How'd you choose the title, Karl?
Oh, it just kind of, I think I'm a real kind of small town guy. I've really not just emotionally, but just logically, I find it so fascinating. I mean, I was talking to a guy last night, one of my neighbors in the little cabin I have up in upstate New York, and he's making maple syrup right now. And I thought to myself, this guy's amazing. He doesn't really have one profession, Tom. He does a little sugaring and he lumbers and he puts in people's foundations and he digs septic systems and he cuts driveways up mountains. And he's a classic example of what we're talking about. He has an 8th grade education, but he's one of the smartest business people I've ever met. He can do almost anything. He tinkers and keeps all of his stuff operating on his own. And this is the genius, really, of the American experiment, is that we've allowed people like that to build their own lives rather than making them into peons who sort of follow what the Lord or the bishop or the local emperor tells them what to do.
But there is this sense, and this is one of the things I think Democrats have gotten themselves in trouble on, that they often voice, and I'm talking here about people in DC, but even some of the, folks who consider themselves, progressive, like AOC and others. They look at the 77 million people who voted for Donald Trump with disdain. I mean, this is the populist uprising that has fueled Donald Trump's rise, is often looked at by elites and others, even in the Republican Party, looked down on and seen as a, again, as you mentioned in the book, something to be feared, something to be shunned, something to be restrained and put down, as opposed to welcomed.
Well, the credentialed class, let's call them that, the people with graduate degrees and expertise of various sort, they have had a sweet run, Tom. They have had a really sweet run where they got really rich and they accumulated a huge amount of power, more than the norm in our society. And we're really kind of in the catbird seat and making a lot of these decisions. It's very threatening now. And it's pretty simple. They're threatened now by the fact that the massive part of society is pulling now back some of that authority that it had ceded to them. And listen, I would like to trust our elites more. It's not healthy when you're in a situation like we are today, where the American public is massively skeptical, not only of the media and crazy people, but they're skeptical of doctors. They're skeptical of churches today. They're skeptical of our military. And frankly, the people who run those institutions have given them good reason to have doubts. But it's really, in the long run, not great for a society that that's the case. So I think all of us hope that eventually elites will act in more responsible ways, which make it possible for the massive middle of us who want to run businesses and go to church and raise our families and not really obsess over what's happening in DC, to kind of hand off some of that authority and trust it to representatives. But right now we can't. I mean, this is kind of an emergency situation where we got to a precipice that scared a lot of people. And there was a kind of a cry from the heart by a lot of the Trump crowd that says, let's break things down and start over.
We've got just a little bit of time left, Karl, but we talked about this yesterday, so I'll pose the question to you. I mean, can folks like Jay Bhattacharya at NIH and Tulsi Gabbard at DNI, people who have actually been targeted by the various agencies and institutions they're now leading, do you think they will be able to restore trust to those institutions, or do you think that once it's lost, it's sort of irreparably damaged and gone forever?
I don't think anything's irreparable. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard in some cases. But, I think I'm really encouraged that people like Bhattacharya and others are in these posts, because they're just what we need. They are people who are inside the tent. They kind of did the credential thing. They earned their chit. They got their ticket punched, but they never lost this sense of who they really work for and who is the ultimate arbiter of these big questions. Perfect example is Musk. Elon Musk is, yes, the richest man in the world. And when he hires for his businesses, he tries to find the 1% of the 1%. He doesn't hire the man off the street. But he was smart enough, Tom, when he had to make really hard decisions, like, how do we keep X on the rails and not have crazy opinions expressed and hate, but also not have this awful censorship regime that I inherited. And he said, we're going to go to the community notes. We're going to forget about these experts who are going to say what can and can't be posted. And we're going to let everyday users more or less crowdsource that decision. Yeah, this is okay. That's not okay. So that was a perfect example of someone who is not by background a populist, who has the credential but he's working inside of the populist kind of ethos now by trusting people. And people who act in that way, I think, Tom, have a real chance of succeeding.
All right, we will have to leave it there. Karl Zinsmeister, author of the new book, Backbone. I urge everybody to go out and get it. He argues that populism is something that should be welcomed and not feared. Karl, thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it, Tom.
All right. And that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Karl and Andy, I'm Tom Bevan. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night.